Thanks, Peter. As Clayton mentioned, we'd like to really thank Peter and SASPA for the opportunity to present today. It's obviously a really important and integral work with the Year 7 moving into high school, and also the new Vet for School students policy and the implications that it does have for our students, but importantly for us here today, around how it impacts our thinking around operationally how we're going to implement this. I will go with it. Some of you may have felt today that we may have discussed the F word. That's funding. Unfortunately, we're still working really deeply around that, but we're hoping to have some solutions around funding really shortly, definitely before the end of the year. We understand that knowing what the funding model was going to be for VET is something that is really owned by Department for Innovation and Skills, but it's also something that we understand can cause some barriers for the timetabling solutions that we will be looking at in our schools. So expect, I suppose, some news around where that's sitting at the moment. Understand that the first paper that went out caused significant feedback, and that's all been taken on board, and you should hear something really soon around that sits. It's similar to a lot of the other work that's happening at the moment. But understand that at the end of last year was when the policy was announced, and really we've only started to tackle that from the beginning of this year. So we feel at the moment in the directorate that we're building a plane, flying it at the same time, and understand the real importance of getting as much information out to schools around the policy, the impact the policy will have, and the work that we'll do to support schools in the change management of that. But the key part of the policy is around where it repositions VET in secondary education. And where that sits at the moment is really looking at VET as one element of it. The career education / industry immersion that sits around that is an integral part of the policy. And at the moment we understand that because of the VET that's already happening in our schools, that we need to ensure that we have a response to that soon, and the career education is following really quickly afterwards. But in terms of where VET sits in, the narrative is shifted from something that really we've seen as happening from Year 10 onwards, and that we're looking at how important career education, contextualising the Australian curriculum, and importantly industry connection with our schools will really influence and impact the decisions our young people will make around what they want to do when they move into senior school. And I think the important message in all of that is that we want to build the skills in our young people so that they can make informed choices, rather than being in a situation where they're influenced by staff, their parents. They only are a support mechanism for the young person as they're making choices. Year 10, we know there's a review of the PLP at the moment, and PLP in many schools has been the mechanism we've used for career education. The World of Work Challenge is another mechanism we're hoping will support young people to engage in exploring what they can do as part of their future pathway, recognising that many of our students that leave school will probably engage in 5, 6, 7 different pathways once they've left. And then it moves us into, I suppose, what we've known as VET. That is what happens at Year 11 and 12. And the key change that I suppose that has happened there is that VET is recognised in 2 different ways. That it's part of a flexible industry pathway, or a FIP, as you may have heard it. Secondly, it can be recognised through stackable VET. Recognising, I suppose, that we now hear industry, who is the big driver of what we undertake VET in our schools around, understands that students will need to complete a full qualification in some instances. Sometimes they won't need to. Sometimes they'll need to complete only a small component of a certificate course, and that's what the employer is looking for. And so we need to be recognising that and supporting students and that transition from school, where both of those options will meet their needs and meet the employer's needs. So flexible industry pathways, or FIPs. Up on the screen we have an example of what agriculture will be. Just to clarify, at the moment there are 26 FIPs, and inside those FIPs are a range of qualifications that are subsidised and funded by the Department for Innovation and Skills, currently through TGSS. In 2022, we will see a change in the funding model from what has now been TGSS to VET in schools. And there will be 3 different ways through FIPs that it can be funded. The first is cadetships. So cadetships are those recognitions of programs by employers and industry where a full qualification is not required. The outcome, though, is that there is either a contract of training or direct employment that will happen as a result. But the driver is the employers or the industry. We're still really trying to form what a cadetship model will look like. But the intent is there to support industry, and we've really heard their voice around, and schools' voice through the review, that that's an important element that needs to be considered. You'd understand currently at the moment it's only full qualifications that would receive funding at the moment. Our number 1 priority within the policy is around contracts of training. So school-based, flexible apprenticeships, traineeships. And that's where the substantial amount of funding sits at the moment, and I'd expect will continue to be there. You'll be aware that our government has a really high expectation around the contracts of training we want for our young people at the moment. The third option is what we traditionally call VET in schools. So that is VET undertaken where there is no contract of training. For us, that is the third option. We want as many of our young people to be in contracts of training as we possibly can. Last year, the beginning of last year, Minister Pisoni discussed flexible apprenticeships, and there was some additional funding that was supported in regards to those flexible apprenticeships. The language has shifted a bit. We're recognising that all apprenticeships need to be flexible in our schools. Whether that's a student typically doing a 1-day-a-week model, 4 days a week on the job, even 5 days a week on the job once they've completed their compulsories. We're ensuring that we want 2 real key factors to happen. 1, they can achieve their SASPA. Secondly, that they know they're going to transition from work into full-time employment. The other element of the FIPs, or the pathways, is what we're calling the wraparound. That is, we know there will be specific industry courses or certificates that employers may be after. It could be a white card, could be working with children, check. Working at heights. Industry has identified what are the important and integral components of that, and normally you'll see that as part of the vocational training that the young person may undertake. Also recognise though, at times it's not. I can't see. Customised safe subjects. We've bandied around this language, and some of the presentations you may have had earlier in your schools or through alliances would have been flexibilities in SASPA. What we've landed on is we know that every student will have a different pathway as they're transitioning through school. So that may mean that they're undertaking the typical subjects of physics and biology. It may mean that we can customise and utilise the flexibilities that sit inside the SASPA to wrap some real learning opportunities that relate to the pathway that the young person has. The other component to that is around where we see engagement occurring. Now, the review that was undertaken during last year clearly articulated that VET has been used as an engagement strategy. And there is significant concerns from industry around that being the driver for a young person to undertake VET. VET is industry training, and as much as possible, we want to ensure that industry training and the pathway a young person has align with each other. The challenge for us is around how we can use the flexibilities in SASPA as much as we can to engage our young people. We understand that will bring some great challenges for some students, but we need to be true to what VET is about, and that is preparing young people to transition successfully to employment, have the skills to be able to do that. And finally, we've heard a lot about it today, the pastoral care, the mentoring, the monitoring. Undertaking adult learning, which VET is, can be challenging for young people. In fact, data will tell us that well over 50% of our students who undertake VET don't complete a certificate course. Evidence will tell us a lot of it's because they really struggle with the level of the learning they have to be part of, being totally responsible for that. So the mentoring, the monitoring that we put around our young people undertaking VET is going to be really, really important. I think the important part of the FIPs, though, is once they've left school. That is, we recognise that these FIPs are industry-based. They'll represent a pathway for a young person to move straight to employment, to continue on vocational learning, or to move into higher education in that industry. So we're trying to move the narrative away as once you've chosen VET, that's the end for you. You're on that pathway. It's not to be like that. It's about recognising the passion that a young person has in a certain area so we can support that pathway, whether that is going to university, whether that's continuing vocational learning or employment. Stackable VET. Stackable VET we spoke about before is the smaller elements of VETs that a student can undertake. That it's not a full qualification. There are 3 levels of the stackable VET. The first one is tasters. The second one is pre-VOC courses. And the third one is skills clusters. In terms of the tasters, they're the opportunities you may provide a young person before they're choosing to enter into a VET course and they're not really sure about vocational learning. So exposing them to some adult learning principles. The pre-VOC course is around what a student can do before entering a FIP. So it may be a Cert 1 in engineering, a Cert 1 in furniture construction. But it's an opportunity for a young person to experience more about the actual theme of what they're interested in. And finally, I suppose what is new is this concept of skills clusters. Skills clusters can occur before undertaking a FIP, or can happen for a student at any stage during their schooling. It can be at Certificate 1, 2 or 3 level. The important part about a skills cluster is the maximum amount of nominal hours currently under the SASPA board's current recognition register is there a maximum of up to 140 hours. But it provides an opportunity for a student to test and try a whole range of different clusters, and there will be numerous. The Industry Skills Council, who provides us all the advice around what's the appropriate qualification, have been really diligent in providing us that information, so that you'll have a package of skills clusters that your students can choose. The important part of the stackable VET is it can be auspiced. And so therefore it provides an opportunity for where you have teachers in your school who have delivered VET previously. They will be able to deliver stackable VET as long as the RTO provides the opportunity for auspicing. We are really aware at the moment that TAFE SA, in particular, have made a decision not to go and work through auspicing with schools. And there's a challenge in behind that. But we are working really hard with our private RTOs to try and provide the opportunity for auspicing. I think I just want to clarify that the decision by TAFE SA is nothing to do with the VET for Schools policy. That is a decision that TAFE SA have made. And we've heard lots of noise around, hold on, this policy is forcing TAFE to make this decision. It's definitely not the case. In fact, we're encouraging auspicing to happen for all stackable VET. We know it's a successful way for kids to experience it. Financially, it's a cheaper way for students to access the opportunity to investigate VET as a pathway through a FIP. Career education is a really integral part, and this probably sells the biggest story for a young person. That is, we have a renewed focus. We've seen lots of, I suppose, elements of career education. There hasn't been a consistent approach across our system at all in this area. So there will be a framework that's developed to support schools. It's a framework. We understand that different timetables will mean the commitment to career education will be different. However, it is an integral part for our young people to have the skills to make really informed choices around their pathways, whatever that may be. So the focus is that we're starting earlier. There is significant work exploration, and you'll be pleased to know that the workplace guidelines, work experience guidelines are going to be made a lot easier for students and schools to be able to access. And importantly, they have a stronger awareness of their pathways. We will produce best practice guidelines, and in those guidelines for career education will be some key elements and then some standards that you can measure how you feel your school is performing in this area, and then drive, I suppose, an opportunity for improvement in the work that you do. So this enhanced career education, the big change from what typically we see through the review has occurred is around industry and employer immersion. That is, we've seen a role change for some of our staff, and that they're going to be heavily involved now in working closely with industry, closely with employers to bring them into schools. An integral part of the success of the work that we do is that it's seen as a partnership. Schools don't have to do this by themselves. And that industry, our workforce, who are crying out for all these skills at the moment, can have a role to play to support the work that we do in schools, so that young people can be inspired by what the opportunities are that they have as they transition from school into the workplace. So we want to increase the context for our young people. We want to increase the connections, and we want to increase the capacity so that that can be a successful transition for them. So we thought it was worthwhile just identifying what we consider to be the considerations that you may want to take into perspective when you're planning your timetable journey. Enterprise and employability skills are an integral part. The review showed that many employers are identifying that our young people just don't have the skills to be able to work in an adult learning environment. Whether it's dealing in the wellbeing issues of potentially their mental health, their wellbeing, the bullying that may happen, or actually working with and connecting, being proactive in their approaches to their learning. Industry is really clear at the moment, as in general, that we're just not quite cutting it at the moment. Pastoral care, we've heard lots about pastoral care being a really important component of it. The literacy and numeracy testing, or VETRO, as you would be aware that it's called. What are we going to do to be able to support our young people to be ready for that assessment? And probably more importantly, if they're not ready for it and they've been through it, how are we going to support them so they can go back through it again? So there's some work there that we know we need to undertake and we need to support our schools with. And that VETRO is something that is obviously driven by the RTOs to make sure that a student's literacy and numeracy is ready for that adult learning environment. Ensuring that we're accurately promoting VET. One thing I learnt last week is that we're not supposed to advertise VET in our schools until we've already signed an agreement with an RTO. Hadn't heard of that before, but apparently it's an ASPA requirement. So we know that we've got lots of work to do in that space to support schools around how they identify their RTOs. We need to ensure that we've got good, strong engagement with our RTOs. They're responsible for the learning for our students in flexible industry pathways. How are we ensuring that they are meeting the needs of our young people, their learning pathway? There's significant work that's being done at the moment around building the capacity of our RTOs, both public and private, to be able to support they do with secondary students. They will be required to undergo ongoing training and development around how to work with secondary students. They are very different, as we know, to adults. How can we collaborate better as groups of schools? And we know in the metro, we have lots of alliances that are there. In the regional space, not necessarily the case. So how can we collaborate together to increase the learning opportunity for our young people and the pathway they want to undertake? Ensuring that we support the multiple entry points and exit points in a FIP. The diagram talks about Year 11 and Year 12. Not necessarily the case, it's just a diagram at the moment. But it could represent a kid that is in Year 13. 14 could be a flow enrolled student. Over a period of time, they get themselves into a position where they can enter a FIP. And then finally, and importantly, how we address any barriers to access. Our schools have a wide variety of complexity, whether that is the socioeconomic area our young people come from, they're isolated because of distance, family and health, well-being issues. How are we going to support that? Now that is, with schools, we already know that you have great strategies that are in place, but as a system, we need to make sure that we're supporting that as well. For career education, it's around having a whole school career education program. It's just seen as part of the learning program that a young person works through. How do we plan, develop, monitor and review it? Can we look at how we link it into the curriculum? I heard Richard talking about that before in his presentation. Can we find the opportunities inside the curriculum that's already sitting there where we can promote the pathway opportunities that sit there for students? What are the skills that they need to be successful in that pathway? Are we providing the opportunities for our students to engage and learn from industry? So industry and employer immersion programs, the World of Work Challenge, other strategies that we know that our students can engage with industries to form that vision, to form that drive for what their pathway may be. And ensuring that we have meaningful work experience that are linked to our career, the students' career paths. There's significant work at the moment around how we short-circuit, I suppose, the long-winded process of work experience and how as a system we can ensure that it's not the onerous task that it has to be at the moment, particularly around the risk assessment that has to happen for every single one of those work experience opportunities. We want our kids to have access to high-quality career guidance and advice. We want to support schools and ensuring we have the best people in front of our young people so that they do get the most up-to-date, accurate and most relevant information. And we want to make sure, finally, that we get access to all our students. We know we have some students from Flow that sometimes don't get access to that information. As a result, they continue in that spiral. How are we going to ensure that we can get that good, worthwhile information to our people? And we know that the work that we're doing at the moment, just to finish up on, is integral for the success not just of our young people transitioning through, but our community and our government. And there's significant funding, I suppose, they've put behind this as well to help this work that we're undertaking. There is, I suppose, as a directorate, probably from the start of next term, you'll see a lot more information communication coming from us as we've landed on a number of more things. The funding paper being one, a lot of guidelines, work support structures that will be there. Metro people will be pleased to know that we've finally landed our vet advisors and that they'll be ready to be supporting schools as of the start of next term. They're working through their induction at the moment. Our regional people, we've had people in place there. Their role is to support you in the change management process. We understand that there's some significant change in both the areas, and we want to be as supportive as we possibly can in that work we've got to undertake. Thank you.